At 88, Max Baer Jr. has reached an age where memory no longer feels like a burden to manage, but a responsibility to honor. For decades, he carried the public image of a carefree television icon, forever frozen in the exaggerated grin and swagger of Jethro Bodine. Yet behind that familiar face lived a man shaped by legacy, ambition, regret, and reinvention. Now, in the twilight of his life, Baer has finally chosen to speak with clarity and humility about a story long clouded by silence, his complicated relationship with Nancy Kulp. Born Maximilian Adelbert Baer Jr. on December 4, 1937, in Oakland, California, Max Baer Jr. entered the world already tethered to legend. His father, Max Baer Sr., was the world heavyweight boxing champion from 1934 to 1935, a charismatic, controversial sports figure whose fame cast a long and unavoidable shadow. Growing up under that name meant inheriting both privilege and pressure. Baer Jr. learned early that public attention could be both a gift and a weight, shaping his confidence while sharpening his awareness of expectations. Athletic, handsome, and naturally magnetic, Baer Jr. seemed destined for success. He attended Santa Clara University, where he studied philosophy and excelled in sports such as golf and boxing. Though he never pursued athletics professionally, the discipline and competitiveness of sports remained central to his identity. Acting, however, ultimately drew him in. Hollywood in the late 1950s was hungry for young talent, and Baer fit the mold with ease. His early career unfolded steadily through guest appearances on popular television series including 77 Sunset Strip, Hawaiian Eye, and Cheyenne. These roles showcased his screen presence but offered little hint of the cultural impact he was about to make. That moment arrived in 1962, when he was cast as Jethro Bodine on the Beverly Hillbillies. The show quickly became a cultural phenomenon, ranking as the #1 television program in America at its peak and drawing tens of millions of viewers each week. As Jethro, Baer created one of television's most recognizable characters, lovable, dim-witted, overconfident, and endlessly entertaining. His mastery of physical comedy, timing, and malapropisms transformed what could have been a simple caricature into a figure audiences genuinely adored. Yet success came at a cost. Typecasting followed swiftly, and Baer found himself trapped by the very role that had made him famous. When the Beverly Hillbillies ended in 1971 after 9 seasons, he encountered a harsh reality familiar to many television stars: escaping an iconic role could be harder than earning it. Casting directors struggled to imagine him outside of Jethro, and opportunities dwindled. Rather than surrender to frustration, Baer reinvented himself. Demonstrating remarkable foresight and business acumen, he turned to producing and directing. In the 1970s, he founded his own production company and began making low-budget films that proved unexpectedly profitable. His breakout success came with Mack County Line, 1974, a gritty exploitation film inspired by true events. Produced on a modest budget, it became a box office hit, earning millions and establishing Baer as a savvy independent filmmaker. Determined to further distance himself from his sitcom persona, Baer took a bold creative leap in 1975 with The Wild McCullochs, which he produced, wrote, directed, and starred in. Playing the morally complex Culver Robinson, Baer explored darker emotional territory than audiences had ever seen from him. The film stood as a declaration of independence, signaling his readiness to claim full control over his creative destiny. That determination paid off with Ode to Billy Joe, 1976, an adaptation of Bobby Gentry's haunting song. The film became a major commercial success and remains the crowning achievement of Baer's directorial career. Its sensitive storytelling and box office appeal proved that he possessed genuine artistic instincts, finally allowing him to break free from the limitations of typecasting. In later years, Baer shifted his focus once again, this time toward business. He became a successful investor in real estate and the casino industry, fueled by an ambitious vision to transform the Beverly Hillbillies into a full-scale commercial empire. He reportedly secured rights to use the show's characters and themes, envisioning themed casinos, hotels, and attractions centered on Jethro's iconic image. Yet his relationship with the series remained conflicted. For years, Baer openly expressed frustration over how the role had constrained his acting career. Over time, however, his perspective softened. Jethro Bodine, once a burden, became a badge of honor, an immortal figure in television history who had brought joy to millions. Baer's later life included moments of deep loyalty and profound tragedy. He remained closely connected to Buddy Ebsen, his mentor and friend, visiting him at his hospital bedside shortly before Ebsen's death in 2003. That quiet farewell, shared with Donna Douglas, reflected a bond rooted in respect and shared history rather than public performance. 5 years later, Baer's life was shaken by devastating loss. In January 2008, his live-in girlfriend, 30-year-old model Cherry Pie Pickake, known professionally as Sherry Rhodes, was found dead in his Lake Tahoe home in an apparent suicide. The tragedy drew intense media scrutiny, turning private grief into public spectacle and marking one of the most painful chapters of his life. Amid these experiences, one unresolved relationship lingered quietly in the background, his connection with Nancy Kulp, who portrayed Miss Jane Hathaway on the Beverly Hillbillies. For decades, Baer rarely spoke about her. Fans remembered only their effortless on-screen chemistry, unaware of the tension that existed behind the scenes. Now, with the distance of time, Baer speaks without defensiveness. He acknowledges that youth and success often blind people to the impact of their actions. Kulp, he reflects, was extraordinarily intelligent, disciplined, and deeply committed to her craft. Where Baer was instinctive and playful, she was precise and academic. Those differences, he admits, created distance. Rumors of animosity between them circulated for years, fueled by Kulp's later comments suggesting she felt dismissed or disrespected. Baer now recognizes the truth in those feelings. He insists there was no hatred, but acknowledges that the show's emphasis on broad comedy benefited him more than her, leaving her dignity misunderstood and her contributions undervalued. After the show ended, Kulp struggled with typecasting and eventually left acting altogether, while Baer remained forever linked to Jethro. Looking back, he regrets not reaching out when he could have. Age, he says, brings clarity, and with it, remorse. If I could say anything to her now, Baer reflects, it would be thank you. Thank you for her intelligence, her professionalism, and her role in creating something enduring. At 88, Max Baer Jr. understands that legacies are not built on laughter alone, but on honesty, humility, and the courage to finally speak the truth. By breaking his silence about Nancy Kulp, he offers not revision, but reconciliation, a fuller portrait of a life shaped by fame, reinvention, loss, and ultimately, reflection. In reflecting on Nancy Kulp, Max Baer Jr. is not attempting to rewrite history, nor to absolve himself of past shortcomings. Instead, he speaks from a place shaped by time, where ego has softened and clarity has replaced defensiveness. Fame, he admits, distorts perspective. During the height of the Beverly Hillbillies, success moved too quickly for introspection. Episodes were filmed at a relentless pace, expectations were enormous, and the pressures of remaining relevant often eclipsed quieter human concerns. In that environment, emotional awareness was rarely prioritized. Nancy Kulp, Baer now understands, operated by a different internal compass. Trained, cerebral, and deeply disciplined, she approached acting not merely as entertainment but as an intellectual pursuit. Her portrayal of Jane Hathaway brought balance and credibility to a series built largely on exaggeration. While Jethro embodied physical comedy and cartoonish bravado, Jane grounded the narrative with precision and restraint. That contrast, so effective on screen, created friction off-screen. Baer acknowledges that his own ease with broad comedy sometimes unintentionally reinforced divisions within the cast. Jethro's popularity brought him audience adoration, creative indulgence, and long-term recognition. Kulp, by contrast, carried herself with seriousness in a genre that rarely rewarded subtlety. Over time, that imbalance fostered quiet resentment, feelings Baer admits he neither recognized nor addressed. When Kulp later spoke publicly about feeling marginalized, Baer says he initially bristled. Like many performers tied to beloved shows, he felt protective of the memory fans cherished. But age has shifted that instinct. He now recognizes that nostalgia often erases discomfort, especially the discomfort of those who did not benefit equally from success. Kulp's experience, he concedes, was valid. After the series ended, their paths diverged sharply. Baer remained tethered to Jethro, for better and worse, while Kulp struggled against the same typecasting pressures with far fewer options. Eventually, She walked away from acting altogether, turning toward political activism and academia, choices that further distanced her from the public image fans clung to. Baer admits he viewed those decisions with misunderstanding at the time, interpreting them as rejection of the show rather than a search for dignity beyond it. There were moments, Baer reflects, when reaching out could have changed the tone of everything. He did not make that call. Life, contracts, pride, and distraction intervened. The silence stretched into years, then decades, until reconciliation became impossible. This regret sits quietly alongside Baer's broader understanding of legacy. For much of his life, he fought the limitations imposed by Jethro Bodine. Only later did he learn to separate the character's permanence from his own humanity. In doing so, he gained compassion not only for himself, but for others who were shaped and constrained by the same cultural moment. Today, Baer no longer measures success by visibility or profit. His reflections on business battles, creative ownership, and personal loss have narrowed into something simpler: accountability. He recognizes that television history is built not only on laughter, but on labor, compromise, and emotional cost. Kulp's contribution, he now insists, deserves acknowledgement free from nostalgia's distortions. Nancy Kulp passed away in 1991, long before this reckoning arrived. Baer understands that his words cannot reach her. Still, he believes speaking now matters. Silence, he says, preserves myths but erases people. Truth, even when late, restores balance. At 88, Max Baer Jr. no longer seeks redemption through reinvention. He seeks it through honesty. By acknowledging Nancy Kulp not as a supporting player in his story, but as a fully realized artist whose experience differed from his own, he completes a narrative left unfinished for far too long. In doing so, he reminds us that the real legacy of television's golden age lies not only in its enduring characters, but in the human lives that shaped them, and were shaped in return. In the final accounting of his life, Max Baer Jr. no longer divides his past into victories and failures. Instead, he views it as a continuum shaped by timing, temperament, and the limits of self-awareness. Fame arrived early and lingered stubbornly, offering security while quietly narrowing the space in which growth could occur. It took decades, and the steady erosion of illusion that accompanies age, for Baer to recognize how incomplete any success story can be when it overlooks the emotional realities of those who shared the journey. The story of the Beverly Hillbillies has long been preserved as a symbol of American television's innocence, rural humor, broad comedy, and uncomplicated joy. Yet Baer now understands that even the most beloved cultural artifacts are born of tension as well as collaboration. Beneath the laughter were unspoken hierarchies, unequal rewards, and personal costs that only become visible with distance. Nancy Kulp's experience, once peripheral to the show's mythology, now stands at its moral center in Baer's reflections. What troubles him most is not conflict, but invisibility. Kulp, he believes, was often misunderstood because she resisted simplification. In a medium that thrives on archetypes, she insisted on complexity, intellectual, emotional, and political. That insistence came at a price. While Baer leaned into exaggeration and survived the consequences, Kulp resisted confinement and paid for it with exclusion. Only now does Baer see how courage can be punished when it disrupts expectation. This recognition has reshaped how he views his own career reinventions. His turn toward filmmaking, entrepreneurship, and legal battles over creative rights once felt like acts of independence. In hindsight, he sees them as parallel responses to the same problem, the struggle to reclaim authorship over one's identity. Where Baer fought publicly and financially, Kulp fought privately and philosophically. Both sought dignity beyond their characters, but only one was widely permitted to succeed. Baer does not claim moral authority in telling this story. On the contrary, he emphasizes uncertainty. Memory, he says, is unreliable, and intention does not erase impact. What he offers instead is acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that talent expresses itself in different forms. That professionalism does not always look like charm. That seriousness has value even in comedy. And that silence, especially when sustained by convenience, can wound as deeply as overt conflict. As his public appearances have dwindled, Baer has become increasingly reflective rather than retrospective. He speaks less about what he achieved and more about what he failed to see. This shift, he believes, is the true privilege of longevity. To outlive one's certainties is to gain access to a wider truth, one that includes responsibility as well as pride. In naming Nancy Kulp with respect and gratitude, Baer is not attempting to close a chapter neatly. Some stories resist resolution. Instead, he reframes the narrative, widening it to include voices that history flattened. He accepts that apology, when delayed, is imperfect, but he also believes that silence guarantees injustice. At 88, Max Baer Jr. understands that legacies are shaped not only by characters remembered, but by relationships reckoned with. By finally speaking openly about Nancy Kulp, he relinquishes the comfort of nostalgia in favor of something more enduring, honesty. In doing so, he offers a final lesson drawn not from television, business, or fame, but from time itself, that truth, however late, remains worth telling.